Welcome to the real world. Whether you're in the military, a corporate job, anywhere you're at, you're going to be graded by, and your performance will be graded on what your boss's expectations are. So just figure those out. Boo, to your point, meet them or exceed them. And if you miss the mark, ask them, hey, what could I have done better?
Who doesn't want to be a great leader? A leader who's calm under pressure, insightful, respected, well-liked. But what does it take to become a great leader? Hey, I'm Boo, and welcome to my podcast. The Few Leadership Podcast defines great leadership and what great leadership looks like. And I've found some of the world's best leaders or experts in the field of leadership to help you accelerate your leadership journey so you can be an ace at the game of leadership. If you're ready to rethink everything you know about leadership, if you're excited about accelerating your leadership journey, let's strap in and ignite your leadership potential. Hey, welcome back everyone to another episode of the Few Leadership Podcast. Very excited to have today's guest back on the show again. We've already done this podcast once. We had a technology issue, but Mark agreed to come back and really share some incredible knowledge. He is the author of Lessons from the Admiral, amazing book. I read this book. It felt like a trip down memory lane from my own career as a young, what we call lieutenant, but what they here in the US call lieutenant. Mark Fava, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
Yeah, thank you, Boo. Thanks for having me again, in spite of the abysmal performance last time.
Again, I'm forever getting my Australian vowels all mixed up. Fava. What's the best way to pronounce your name?
You're fine either way. Fava is the correct Italian pronunciation, but since I've grown up, everybody's been saying Fava, and we've sort of acquiesced to that unless I travel to Italy, at which point it becomes Fava real quickly.
Yeah, we have in Australia plenty of Greeks and Italians. My own background is Greek Armenian, so Fava would be the way that we would pronounce that, given how those European languages have kind of shaped our very, very unique accent. So, Mark, we had a really cool podcast last time. So we're going to kind of do a reset and start from scratch.
Sure.
Just by way of introduction, Mark is a veteran. He served in the U.S. Navy, pilot in the U.S. Navy, served for many years before transitioning into the corporate world, and has been in the corporate space for a very long time, and has what I would consider a relatively challenging and certainly interesting job now as, and I might get this not 100% correct, but the ombudsman at Boeing, which is thankfully on a great pathway to growth and redemption at the moment. Mark, what have you learned when you reflect on your career as a veteran that just works no matter what? Where not just in the military, but you mentioned in your book how you've always managed to get the job you've always wanted throughout your career. And I think for a lot of people, that's an aspiration that just doesn't exist. So what is it? What applies? What have you learned? How does it translate across so seamlessly into everyday life?
Yeah, listen, I think one of the earliest lessons I learned is I had checked into a squadron, young lieutenant, just like you said, and the first question the commanding officer asked me on a check-in interview is, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I want to get qualified. I want to do this. I want to do that. And I was thinking, 2 to 3 years, everything I had to do as a naval flight officer, not a pilot, but the backseat guy, P3. And he said to me, he goes, no, he says, what do you want to do in 5 years? Because I need to know that now to start positioning you correctly. And I think that's been the most important thing, figuring out where you want your career to go, not necessarily in the next 2 years, but 5 years. And what I've really learned in the corporate world is the real big leaders think 25, 50 years down the line. And I think that's become critically important.
Yeah, you sort of see that manifest in culture, don't you? And you look at the way that China, and not just China, but how Chinese folks view the world in terms of multi-generational, as opposed to a fully powered capital model where everything is measured in a quarter. And the pressure that puts on decisions. I love that 5-year rule. I call it the 3-year rule. It's like whatever you want to do, give yourself 3 years, because that's about how long you can pretty much do anything in 3 years.
Yeah, and the first year you're not going to know what you're doing, right? It
Yeah,
takes. I tell
yeah,
people that all the time. They're very uncomfortable in the first couple of months. I said, look, you got to give it a year before
yeah.
you quit. You've got to do that. It takes that long to figure out what you're doing and how to do it.
But that's a paradox, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the world today and the speed that the world demands versus the speed in which we need to think, and I love Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, around the ability to disconnect, to be thoughtful and creative. You're in a very fast paced environment now, very high consequence, just like being in the Navy. What do you see at the coalface in terms of what leaders are just trying to manage at the moment in terms of meeting expectation, some of the challenges with a younger workforce? One of our clients is actually Northrop Grumman, and we're launching a huge leadership program because they see this gap. I'm not 100% sure how much I'm allowed to talk about, what they're seeing is a lot. Is that there's some really senior, experienced people, very very skinny top of the pyramid, and an enormous amount of young leadership that's inexperienced, and a massive gap between the two. Are you seeing a similar thing in your day to day?
Yeah, and I think it was only exacerbated by COVID, right? We just have this group of early career folks who got used not to being present as we did during the pandemic. So I really think the ability to engage with one another, to cool the jets, right? I think what we're seeing also generational, and it's my kids too. They come in and pretty quickly they want to know, okay, how do I get to be you? How do I get to be the leader real quick?
Yeah.
And you've got to put in the time, you've got to put in the rotation. You've got to be patient. You've got to demonstrate you're good at what you're doing. And so finding that medium between what you said, Boo, the fastness of what we expect these days versus the experience, I think you need to get to the next step.
It is this expectation, and maybe it's all the Nepo kids on Instagram, but where kids just feel like there's this entitlement to be the boss and to be autonomous and have this work-life balance, which is really life balance with a little bit of work. And, almost like we've lost the passion and joy that comes from a hard day's work.
Right. The journey along the way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the lessons you've learned and that I've learned as well in a system like the US Navy, where you're constantly dealing with this. I mean, every 6 months, new people show up into the squadron, right? And these new people at every level are new. The squadron commander is new to the role. The pilots, the crew are new to the role, the maintenance. At some stage, there's always a third that's kind of new every year, and a third that's been there for a little while, and a third that's on their way out the door.
Right.
What did you learn about in the Navy that made that system so effective?
I think it was just basic standardization. We do try to do the same thing in the corporate world, but I think the military is very good at it, right? We had a book for the P3 aircraft that we lived by, and it was very clear on everything we did. And we had policies and procedures, and there were expectations, and you understood from the very beginning that really didn't change. While the leader didn't change, and the style might change, and the communication might change, the general expectations, the training track, what people wanted you to do and believe you needed to do to get to the next step pretty much stayed constant.
And if you don't know what a P3 is, and you're listening to this and you're not an aviator, it's like an older commercial airliner that has way more power in the engines than it needs. And there's a story in Australia about a P3 that did a fly past and actually ripped the engines off the engine mount because the engines are so powerful. And my very first mission when I was a 19-year-old waiting for my pilot's course was on a US Navy P3 flying around 100 feet at night. It is a very hectic environment. Like, there is a lot going on that aircraft. So tell us a little bit about, because I call that level of leadership the sort of leading in the now, the second by second decision making. Tell me a little bit about your experience in that environment, and also how you created this alignment to the mission, and were able to just kind of, if you think about a comparison to normal life, and the percentage of success in that environment is so much higher than what we experience. So what are some of the secrets to success there, Mark?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, the P3 was a Lockheed Electra, 4 propeller engine aircraft created during primarily right before the Cold War and thereafter for anti-submarine warfare to hunt Soviet submarines and to do overwater missions. A crew of 12 people, 4 pilots, 3 to 4 pilots, 2 flight engineers, 2 people and 2 officers in the back, like me, naval flight officers. One would be a mission commander or tactical aircraft coordinator. The other would be the navigator communicator. Then you have some brilliant enlisted aviators in the back that help gather the acoustics to help you figure out where the submarine is. But I got to tell you what really led us through that. And we were all 20 something. I mean, we're mid 20s flying around the world in this multi-million-dollar aircraft tracking Soviet submarines 200 feet over the water, like you said. And there's no base, there's no radio contact, there's nobody. I mean, it's up to us not only to do the mission, but to respond when we have an emergency. And I think what got us through there was the camaraderie and the expertise and the expectation that everybody knew what their job was. And we relied on each other for that. So as soon as something happened, we all went into the automatic mode. And there were some things we had memorized. There were other things we'd pull out a checklist for. But everybody knew what the expectation was. And it worked like teamwork and clockwork.
With Afterburner, we debrief a lot of organizations, thousands, over 4,000. Like we've done nearly 38,000 debriefs. And the two biggest contributors to not meeting expectation organization is failure to define a mission and unclear roles and responsibilities. And I think for today's modern leader, if you're overwhelmed and you're struggling to find awareness, invest in those two things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You wouldn't really ever plan a mission, right, where no one was kind of involved, where everyone on the aircraft knew the mission. That you don't just stick people down the back and say, hey, look, figure out how this thing works. Just give me information. Don't worry about whether it's important or not. Just keep, because think of that TACO role for a minute. I mean, that's mission control, right? On a P3. How did you go through a process to maintain awareness of what's going on? Because certainly in the mission I was on, there was so much going on, because sometimes there's more, particularly on the exercise, right? When there's more than one submarine, and then there's a fleet as well that you're not get shot down by. What were some of your secrets, and how have you carried that across into your life around being an aware person rather than just exist and be overwhelmed?
Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, so a typical mission might be a 15-hour day, of which 6 to 8 hours will be flying. But every mission started with a brief, everybody together on where we were going, what the objective was, what frequencies we were going to be on, who was going to do what. Like you said, if we were working with the carrier battle group, the times we were expected to be there, the altitudes. Then we'd go out and pre-flight the plane for the next hour, all the radios, all the frequencies. And then every time we flew in that aircraft, we'd gather in the back of the aircraft and the pilots would brief the emergency procedures. I heard those emergency procedures 1,000 times, right? Mm-hmm. In the event of a fire of unknown origin, we're going to do this. In the event of bailout, we're going to do this. In the event of ditch. Everybody knew it, but every single time we flew, it was repeated. So, and then once you get on the mission, everybody understands, like you said, what their role is. And we rely on each other for that. Those roles are clearly defined, be it the radar operator in the back, the acoustic operators, the flight station, who has the con or who is directing the mission, whether it's the guy in the back or the pilots in the front. Pilots always have safety of flight, but the mission commander can be in the back directing the tactical mission. And it was very clear what those roles were. And then to your point, what Afterburner continues to do so well is focus on, the feedback and the debrief. We'd land and your day wouldn't be over. You'd take all your data off the plane on these big rolls of acoustic tape, and you'd go somewhere and you debrief for another 2 or 3 hours. So it could be a 15 or 16 hour day. You'd be absolutely miserable. The feeling your flight suit is wet. Everybody stinks, but you got it done. And, you debriefed and you said, hey, you might have missed this call, or you should have done this, or you should have done that. Here's what we did good. And then 12 hours later, you're at it again.
Yeah. And you would never fly a mission without a debrief, right? No one just gets off an airplane and goes home and then just rocks up the next day. And so how often have you observed that behavior outside the Navy?
It's not commonplace. I mean, it's, yeah. People will say, well, we need to do a root cause analysis. Especially we do that when something goes wrong in the aircraft scenario, be it my employer or anywhere else. When I was working at Delta Airlines, especially when there's that, but when there's some type of aberration or improper procedure or an accident or an incident, absolutely it's going to be done then. But a lot of times when things go well, like you said, everybody just goes on their way and it's okay. And that's probably when you ought to be doing the debrief. Here's what went well. Here's what we can do better, not assuming that everything went great. And gosh, if you love the Blue Angels like I do, that's what they do. You know that every single mission time. They do that every time, because you're never perfect all the time.
Ever. So watch those shows, by the way, if you're listening, get onto Prime, watch the Thunderbirds, watch the Blue Angel. Gosh. watch it for the fun, but also just listen
Yes.
to the culture and observe everything that they're doing in terms of what excellence looks like. They're great shows, much more affordable than getting Afterburner to come work for you. So go and have a look. In the book, there's some really key chapters that resonated with me in terms of the modern day business. And one of those is always be on time. Tell me a little bit about the way in which the Navy and the aviation community values time.
Look, we hear this sometimes in the corporate world. Hey, I respect your time, this, that, and the other. But you got to do that in practice, right? And in the military, as you said, we both got on this podcast 10, 15 minutes early. And you immediately said, I love the military because you're always early, right? Early's on time. On time could be potentially late, depending on who else is in the room. And I think it's critically important. We got in this habit during COVID with all these virtual meetings where we would say, okay, the meeting starts at 1200 or 1:00, and we're going to give everybody a few minutes to join, and it would just drive me crazy. No, you should be getting on at 12, 10 minutes before, so the meeting starts on time, because you're cutting into that amount of time. And I just think it's very important. It's part of that attention to detail. And in the military, like you said, if they said check in on station between 1300 and 1315, there was somebody looking for us as we were flying in at that time on that altitude. And we better be there, at the right
within
time,
5
at the right
seconds,
altitude.
right? Like that's it.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Because they were armed, and if they had something coming in at them at a different time, not in that gate, we couldn't talk on the radios. Typically then we were in an electronic emission condition where we couldn't talk. So that's how we got to where we needed to be. And that was critical to be on time.
Yeah, I remember one of my mentors in the Air Force said to me, if there's 10 people in a room and you're 5 minutes late, you just wasted 50 minutes.
Yes.
You wasted 5 minutes of everyone else's time. And that's
right.
And that's inconsiderate, and that's selfish. So for me, I've always looked at timekeeping as being selfless to others. It's important to be able to respect other people's time. And also, what we profess now in Afterburner is we say, don't set the meeting start time, set the end time, and then work backwards to try and get out of these 30, 50 minute, 1 hour long meetings. And I think in a world where we're used to thinking in terms of seconds and minutes, whereas most people think of the world in terms of, with seconds and minutes in terms of gratification, but weeks and months in terms of actually getting stuff done, there's all these opportunities. I call it the 1,000 decisions a day you're missing out on because you're setting your deliverables too short. And I think what's great that we translate out of the missionized world of the military is that we create these moments of focus. Like you said, 12 hours on a mission. Thank God I didn't have to do that in a Hornet. But then you had 12 hours of downtime, like it was really intentional, right? Being on is intentional, being off is intentional, rather than this kind of always on that we're experiencing now.
Yeah.
The other chapter that I wasn't really expecting, and it was kind of resonated with me a lot I have this philosophy of my kids have to be well-mannered. Like I don't care how you do at school or whatever else happens, but you need to have impeccable manners. And you have a chapter here, which is say thank you, Janie's fur coat. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. The one thing you could do and I learned this as a follower and a leader, and then I learned it as a follower in the book, is at the end of every day when I was working for the Admiral's aide, as the Admiral was aide for this Admiral, the days were longer than a P3 mission. It could be a 15 or 16 hour day because I'm getting up before the Admiral, making sure everything's executed properly on time. But at the end of every day, he would always look at me and say, hey, thank you, shipmate. You did a good job. Even if I did a bad job. Or he'd say, thank you, shipmate. Didn't go perfectly today, but you're not going to fire you. Come on back tomorrow. That went so far. And the other thing I said in the very beginning of the book, and this is something we did in the military all the time, he told me some jobs are going to be above your pay grade, some jobs are going to be below your pay grade. And the story at the end about Janie's fur coat is we were going on a trip. It was probably a holiday social event out of town where she was expected back then to be there as the wife of the Admiral. And I showed up one morning to get him to go to the aircraft, to go to the P3. We were flying down on a P3 to the event. She was going commercial air, and he hands me her fur coat and says, you are the keeper of the fur coat. She doesn't want to check this. She doesn't want to carry it on. I told her you'd take care of it. And, my initial thought, Boo, was, you got to be kidding me. I'm an officer in the United States Navy. What the hell am I doing worried about carrying her coat? And then I remember what he said. Good jobs, bad jobs, do the best of them to the best of your ability. And that's what I did for the next 3 days. I kept the coat, got her the coat, put the coat on her. And when we got back, he said the same thing. She told me thank you that night when we returned the coat. And he looked at me when she shut the door and said, listen, he goes, thank you very much. He goes, I know that was below your pay grade. And he said, I really appreciate it. It just meant a lot to me. And it was more important than my sword that we didn't lose the coat. Yep. I said, okay, got it. That was the mission. Now there were 100 other things I had to make sure we did right during that one. But just the fact that he said thank you every day just went a long way. And I found that to be the same thing in a law firm, at Delta, in a corporation. People want great pay. They want good benefits. But part of that culture is feeling appreciated and feeling some level of empathy, sympathy, and gratitude.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We used to have we would call them the SLJs in the Australian Air Force, the shitty little jobs. And, there was an expectation that you did an SLJ just as well as you flew a mission. And the bosses would come up and go, hey, boo, I've got an SLJ for you here, mate. But this has got to get done. And, I think what I love about that concept is right up front, you're defining flexibility and defining that this is your role. And sometimes you're going to have to overperform and other times you're going to have to underperform. And that's just it. To get away from that, that's not my job, or I don't do this, or, and I think as people gradually move their way up the corporate ladder, there is this arrogance of that's beneath me, that, and what inevitably happens is we push all the SLJs down on the team and then the leaders keep the good stuff. And you end up with this kind of disengaged group of people. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How many things you do in the military that you just sit there and you're like, I just cannot believe that I'm doing this right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, let me tell you, in the P3, we didn't have a working head. We didn't have a working lavatory. What we did have was a plastic urinal that was a big white tube that stood about 4 feet high with a lid on it. And some poor enlisted guy, after every flight, would have to dump that thing out. You talk about a terrible SLJ. When he joined the Navy, he or she didn't think, well, mostly he back then, because we didn't have females, they didn't think that'd be part of their job, but they did it. And they understood that was part of, unfortunately, being the most junior person on the aircraft.
If you're enjoying the show, I'd just like to ask you a little favor. We're on a mission here to ignite the world's leadership potential. We need to reach out to as many leaders as we possibly can. So if you're enjoying the show, I just ask you to leave a review, to subscribe, to help introduce this podcast to other leaders to join you on your journey to flawless leadership. We're going to head back to the episode now. I hope you've enjoyed what you've learned today. Please remember, let's ignite a movement of flawless leaders. Subscribe, leave a review. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, so something that's inferred in the book as the core pretext, which I think is worth digging into a little bit, is in the military, we have these aides. We call them aide de camp in Australia. And what's I think is really unique about it is you have an admiral, which would be the equivalent of a SVP, VP in a business, and they have a very junior person relative to their rank as this trusted confidant, because the role is more than just what you do, right? You become you see a lot of stuff that you probably shouldn't see. You're privy to a lot of conversations that are very confidential, and you see the human side of that leader rather than the crafted version that everyone else sees. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, what it was like when you first got that job, and for everyone on the call, if you get an aide job, you're doing exceptionally well in your career. Like you don't get an aide job if you're the bottom half of the organization, right? You're a star performer. So how was that? And frame the way you saw the world of leadership from day one to the day you were posted out.
Yeah, it was a tough selection process for the job. And I was told, listen, I really wanted to stay. I finished up my first squadron in Jacksonville. I wanted to stay in Jacksonville and go be a naval flight officer instructor. It would have been nice. I could have stayed there and just not having to move. And they said, look, you ought to, a lawyer, JAG lawyer, military lawyer on the Admiral staff said, hey, you ought to go interview for this job. But the catch was just what you said. If you get selected for the interview and you get the interview, it's not one if you get the offer that you can say, I thank you very much. I think I'm going to do something else. I mean, once your name is in the hopper, there's no saying no once you get the offer. And I got the offer. And you're right. I mean, you see absolutely everything. And I say that in the book. I say some people say you get to know the Admiral as well as, if not better than his spouse, because you're going to hear things and see things that other people never will hear or see. And you're going to see the offside of the person. So I saw him fussing with his wife. I saw him kissing his wife. I briefed him as we were standing side by side in the urinals because we had 2 minutes before we went into a building, and I had to tell I had to say, "Boss, this is the person who's in there," and he's going, "Yep, yep, yeah." I told him his fly was down. I mean, just all kinds of things. And you learn very quickly that, as you said, that they're humans too, right? And if you work for a good one, they're really good humans, right? They become almost a never to replace your father, but almost like a fatherly figure that you realize that. Before then, if I saw a flag officer, I was like, please don't assign me any duty near him. If he's going to be in the squadron that day, I'm going to be somewhere else because nothing good's going to come of that, right? But once I was with him, and he told me very early on, you're going to do things above your pay grade, below your pay grade. You're also going to see a lot of stuff that's confidential. It's business of a U.S. Navy Admiral, both on duty and off duty. Nobody else needs to know about it. You got it? And I said, yes. And, there's a chapter in there where I violated that. I ran my mouth too much, and I got in trouble because I just sort of forgot that I was telling somebody about what we were doing on a weekend. But he was, again, very forgiving. But I think you realize that everybody is human. And if you work with a good leader, the rewards of what you see and what you do in the long hours are significant compared to the hard work.
I want to unpack that comment you just made about when you're a junior or when you're in the squadron and one of the general staff comes into the room, that a lot of folks kind of scurry. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with senior leadership after that role and how much more comfortable that you became. Because I certainly know, and you said before, hey, boss, like what a lot of people in the military, we've got these bosses, squadron commanders, and these folks that are 2 or 3 grades above us. And it's yes, sir, no, sir. But very often there is a sense of familiarity after a while, and you just call them boss. Hey, boss,
right.
What can I do for you, boss? And you break that down. There's kind of this myth in the civilian world that we just follow orders and do what we're told. And it's kind of the opposite of that is really what we do. So tell me, because I think this is really important for junior leaders who are afraid and therefore they don't open up so much. But how did you view accessibility to leadership after that posting?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, I first realized it when I got out of the Navy and went to law school, but I stayed in the reserves. And when I was in law school, there were so many people that were worried about, first year law school class and, everything's a Socratic method in U.S. law schools, and afraid of the professor, afraid of this, afraid of that, and always uptight. And they said, Mark, how come you never, you just don't seem to be too bothered about any of this? I said, well, I've been on a P300 feet above the water when an engine goes out. I've had admirals and senior people yell at me. And I've also, done a lot of things and been exposed to a lot of leaders. And at the end of the day, it's right. You become accustomed to it, but you also know when to turn on the switch and turn off the switch in terms of the yes, sir, right? In a social setting, even in the corporate world, I know and learn to know when it was Jack and when it was Mr. Somebody, or how to act and change that decorum, or how I acted towards a senior leader. And I think that's very important. People will say, they'll complain even about their boss. I say, well, have you even talked to them or asked them about why they graded you this way or why they gave that feedback? And they'll say, no. I was like, good gracious, ask to get on the calendar, ask for some time, go have a beer with them, just figure out some way to get to know people. And even if there's a resistance to do that, figure out a way to try and make it happen.
It's important, this concept, I think, because a lot of people feel they miss out on promotions or they're overlooked because of the politics of the organization. Oh, it's politics. They like this person more than that person. And I think there's a nuance there where people who do tend to get ahead tend to understand the expectation of the leader more and deliver to the expectation rather than be really good at doing stuff. And when you're doing stuff, but it's not pointed this where the leader wants to go to, it's easy to take that personally because you're like, hey, I worked my ass off here. I did all this work. I'm here. I work longer hours than everyone else. But really, you're just spinning wheels. And I think one of the most powerful conversations you can have with any leader is to sit down with them and go, hey, boss, what does good look like to you? Like, what can I do? And when you're afraid of them, or you feel like I'm just waiting for direction, then all of a sudden you don't get it because, a good leader provides intention, not direction. Then all of a sudden you kind of get a bit lost in the matrix of the whole organization.
Yeah. I mean, in the first chapter of the book, he sat me down and said, here are the 5 things that are important to me. Those are my expectations. Do these 5 things and we'll get along just fine. Now, there was much more than that, but at least I knew it. And then he would also tell me when I'd missed it, or I would ask. And then people say, well, my boss won't talk to me. I can't get to him. Well, then talk to somebody else, right? Talk to somebody else that knows what his or her expectations are. talk to the administrative assistant, talk to other people who work for him or her, and figure that out. And then, my daughters would say, well, Dad, that's not fair. I have to meet his expectations. I said, well, welcome to the real world. Whether you're in the military, a corporate job, anywhere you're at, you're going to be graded by, and your performance will be graded on what your boss's expectations are. So just figure those out, Boo, to your point, meet them or exceed them. And if you miss the mark, ask them, hey, what could I have done better? I really thought I was doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown, and I'm paraphrasing here, talks about disappointment and depression is the product of an unmet expectation. And really, what I think the military is really good at is setting expectation. So there's an expectation of a pilot, an expectation of a squadron commander, an expectation of an aide, of an admiral, and it's not very ambiguous. And again, it's another missed opportunity in the corporate space. I think people get confused about being free to think in an organization, being very different to the freedom to create chaos. I mean, the freedom to discover what it is you need to do to arrive at a destination. But if you don't have a destination, you're doomed to just be free to make a mess, free to create chaos. Now, in your career outside the military, what's one of the most challenging circumstances you've found yourself in that you needed to be, quite delicate and be on your absolute A game as a leader?
Yeah, I think there've been a couple. I mean, I was the operations attorney at Delta Airlines on 9/11. I mean, that was surreal. But there've been other incidents where something comes to you that's a complete surprise. You're going along your normal day and then something pops in. And I think the biggest challenge in those aspects for me has always been make sure you get all the information first, control your emotion before you make a decision, and then figure out when is the proper time for that decision. Because it might not be immediate, but it surely might not be 2 days later. And I think that's always been a challenge for me. But I think as a leader, that's your job, right? Getting the information, keeping your emotion, realizing that many times the first reports are inaccurate, as we often know from the military, right? And then figuring out when to act, and you better act on the right information. And you hope that you have about 80 or 90% of the information. You can't wait for 100% of it.
Yeah, that's the great thing about aviation, isn't it? When there's an accident, something happens, your condition, don't make an assumption. Don't guess what happened. Like, wait until the investigation is finished. And then you'll find, like with the MD-11 that just crashed, recently, UPS, the amount of chatter and noise around, oh, this happened. And when I see that happening, I just look at how businesses do exactly the same thing with some half-baked piece of information,
right?
And someone's opinion or perception rather than reality. And just how far down a rabbit hole you can go purely because you didn't stop, ask the right questions. And if you've listened to this podcast often, you'll hear this recurring theme, which we call curiosity. And as a leader, one of your fundamental values is value curiosity. Ask lots and lots of questions, because if you're not asking questions and people aren't asking you questions, you're operating in a cone of silence, a bucket of ambiguity. So I think I mean, I can't even imagine what that must have been like, being in that sort of a pivotal role in an airline when that happened at 9/11. I mean, how do you take the emotion of the event, put it in a bucket, and then just get on with the job?
That was very difficult because the magnitude of what had happened we never envisioned anything like that catastrophic, that horrific, that impactful, that unplayed before everyone's eyes on television. Emotionally, it was incredibly difficult because we all had friends and families that were either, if you're in the airline, people that are flying. I had reserve buddies that were flying for the airlines that were impacted, for American and United. We immediately were thinking about our families. But, it's the same thing that I said in the military. I was very fortunate at the time that Delta had policies and procedures for what we do when an accident happens, and where you go and who's in charge and who sits at the table and who's invited in the room. That was very clear. And while we had practiced that quarterly, we'd never envisioned this, but we did the same thing, realizing that this was an accident or an incident of significant magnitude. Everybody went to where they were supposed to be. Everybody sat in their right seats. And the CEO was in the room, at the helm. So I think, again, the training paid off, and it was training that everybody had participated in. It wasn't fake training. When we did the training, people were there. The people that were supposed to be there were there. If the leader isn't there for the training, other people don't show up for the training.
Yep. So let's take a little note, everyone listening, training and standards. Like if you feel like you're operating in overwhelm and chaos and everything feels like it's the first time you've seen it, it's just because you haven't invested the time and effort to work out what's our core job, what are some of the things that have historically happened. There's general themes and things that happen all the time in any business. So defining the knowns is important because every standard only gets you 80% there, right, Mark? Like even when you have an engine fire and you run through the boldface actions, there's still the next question, which is what caused that? Is that still a problem? And what's the flow-on effect beyond what we've just done? Like, but without the initial action of getting yourself situated and calm down and everyone's ready to go and ready to receive information, you perpetuate further chaos and stress.
Yeah. Our emergency procedures section in what we call our NATOPS book, which was the flight manual.
Very familiar with the Hornet NATOPS. Yep.
Yeah, you definitely had a Hornet NATOPS. But remember, Boo, what it said was it gave you the standards for all of these procedures, right? Engine out, fire in the cockpit, fire here, loss of this, loss of communication. But it also had a warning or a note at the very beginning that said any one of these procedures in and of itself follow this. However, if there are multiple at the same time, that's when judgment kicks in, right? And that's the 20% you're talking about, right? Yeah. Okay. The old aviate, navigate, communicate, figure out what you've got. And you might have three things at once, and you got to figure that out.
Yeah. And the old if then as well. So if this, go to this page, and if there, jump back to this page. And everyone, you've got your little manual, which is the emergency stuff. Then you break out the flight manual and you go into detail. And then if it's even a bigger problem, you get on the phone to Lockheed or Boeing and they start to do it from first principles. But I think, the bit that's lacking in corporate is the tip of the spear, which is just get everyone in. I remember working with a big supermarket chain, and if something went wrong and let's say, their website went down, they get 200 people on the phone and work it out from first principles. And then it's like, did anyone just turn it on and off? Like, did anyone just do something? Where's the book that says this is the first thing we do when our website goes down? We don't have a book. Right. And it's like, surely your website going down is something that you would want to be prepared for in today's, and then that was great because that precipitated in that organization, the production of 186 checklists for 186 likely technology events in an organization and what they're going to do. And honestly, they went from taking 2 to 4 days to solve a problem to 1 to 2 hours.
Oh yeah. There's nothing like that foresight. Back in the old days, you remember it used to be, for us, it would be a 3-ring binder. Mine, I knew exactly where it was. When I was at Delta, it was red. It was the only red one on my shelf. And as soon as that happened, I grabbed it and I had tabs and I knew exactly where to go to. And guess what? We had the old grease pencil, right? So you would sit there and check the stuff off as you're doing it, but it provides you that sense of organization and skill and helps you get rid of the emotion because you're following what will work and you're checking it off as you go.
And even that's just reducing your kind of primal fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So you just, because sometimes you're going through that checklist and you're not even thinking, right? You're just literally, and then slowly, okay, I'm getting my head around it now, and the deeper, thoughtful structures of the brain can kick in. Yeah, as the world tends towards honoring the individual over the collective, I think all these little really useful ways of working are kind of getting lost. And I still prefer a 3-ring binder over digital when something goes wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
nothing like having a tabbed up 3-ring binder to increase performance.
Well, listen, you're a professional speaker, and I do a little bit of that myself, but I always have, I might have the PowerPoint and the clicker, but underneath the podium, I've still got the 3-ring binder that I don't have to revert to. But if I have to revert to, and I don't know it by heart and the AV fails, which it is an occasion will do, I can last resort, pull out the 3-ring binder, page to the right page, get a quick reset and keep going. Hopefully I've got it in my head, but it's just nice to have that still there.
Big lesson learned from the podcast today, folks. Build your 3-ring binder. One of the concepts I want to finish off on the podcast, because I think I see this all the time, that people are afraid to do this, which is ask for help. As a leader, this perception that if I ask for help or I say I don't know, I'm going to lose respect. Drill down into that concept a little bit, if you could, Mark, about why a leader should ask for help, how to ask for help, and why it's one of the smartest things you can do.
Yeah, but before you even get to the asking for help, you better have a circle of friends who you'd ask for help for, right? For as a commanding officer of squadron, it might be your XO, it might your executive officer, your second in command, it might be 3 other commanding officer, somebody that you know you can call if you have to ask for help, or a mentor. For me, I always had that network where I knew that if I was really in trouble, this person would help me or would advise me. So I think if you have that foundation first, I think as soon as you're very troubled and you think you're feeling overwhelmed, you go early often to that person and say, look, I need an audience. Here's what's going on. Now, if they're true friends and true mentors, they'll hear that tone in your voice and they say, all right, I'm coming down right now. Or, get that person on the phone right now. I'll be happy to talk to you. And when you're making a critical decision, if you make a wrong decision and you make it by yourself, they'll often say, and I learned this in legal investigations and in taking a lot of depositions, who else did you talk to before you made that decision? And gosh, the worst thing you could say is, if it was a bad decision, even though you did the best you could, the worst thing you could say is, I just did it by myself because I thought it was the right thing to do. And it might have been, and you might have made the right decision, or you might have made the wrong decision. The better thing to do is, if you had time, was say, look, I called this person, that person, and that person, and we discussed it very quickly. And based on their thoughts, I made this decision. Again, I just think that's a much better position to be in, because you're going to have somebody that you trust that's not going to have your level of emotion, that's not going to have your level of urgency, that can perhaps guide you. So I'm a big fan of asking for help, and no one needs to know. I mean, you don't have to run around, like a chicken with their head cut off saying, I need to talk to somebody. Maintain your calm, maintain your decorum, but know who you're going to ask for help. And boy, there's been some incredible people who have helped me in some very sticky situations. And some have even said, if their bosses are there above me, they've even said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of this. Wow.
Yeah,
that's huge, right?
And you don't know unless you ask, right? But what about the flip side as a mentor? And I think people underestimate how meaningful it is to be asked for help.
Yes. Yeah. And early, right? I've always told the folks that either work with me or for me, I'm always there to help you. If you tell me you need to talk to me right away, you don't need to get on my calendar, just text me, just call me and say, hey, I need to talk to you. And let's do it. And then, I think it's just incredibly important to say, I'll always be there to help you, to advise you. There are some mistakes that are unrecoverable, right? And I'm not guarantee you that you're going to have your job, but I will guarantee you, if I find out about it late and you're trying to cover it up, it's not going to go well, right? I'd rather know sooner rather than later. And that way I have the biggest ability to help you.
It's awesome. Mark, thank you so much for being generous to come onto the show twice. We had a flawless experience today. It was wonderful. We could talk for hours and hours. Make sure you grab Mark's book, Lessons from the Admiral. And the good news is he's got another one in the works. And look down into the show notes here or under the video, and you'll see all the links to get to Mark. He's a wonderful speaker, a very unique and valuable human being. So, Mark, thanks again.
Thank you, Boo,
for joining me on The Few.
Appreciate all you guys are doing at Afterburner.
Thanks, mate.